Alright guys, Paul from Paul's Karts here. We have the GX270 head block. This is a GX390 head gasket on here. I'm just using this for spacing. I don't have any head gaskets here for a 270. So I'm just using this for thickness. As you can see, we got the block decked. We're at 0 now. Head's been milled. Radius bowls, massive intake valve installed, 36. It hasn't been milled flush, but this valve lays right over into it. Had to mill it a lot to make up for this dished piston, but the dished piston was the only thing we could do to get the 10 thousandths over piston. So what we're doing now, we are claying it up. We are trying to find our piston to valve clearance. What I always use is plumber's putty. Stay Put brand, plumber's putty, little ball. Well, this will probably do both of them. You know exactly where they're gonna hit. Just make a little ball-sized nugget. Squish these down onto the piston. You don't really need that much. Truthfully, it's a lot, but you just want to fill this area up. Basically the touchdown zone where the valves are going to come in, where you know they're going to be at the closest point area. So these things hit pretty much about middle of the piston, you know, height wise, where they're gonna come in. They're not gonna come in down here, they're gonna come in like up here, like right in the middle area-ish. So put a little bit of clay, plumber's putty, Play-Doh, whatever your heart desires. You know, you don't need to be perfect about it. You really don't. So we have that in there. You know, it absolutely sucks, and for anybody that knows what I'm talking about, claying up an engine when it has black Venom roller rockers in it, yeah, you know what I mean. It's just a lot just putting the rockers in to begin with, and you know, honestly, it's like 3-hour job, I think it was, to get the push rods cut to length, and that was with all the push rod length checkers, everything, top of, like, every single thing you could own. Still, I think fiddling with it 3 hours. You know, you got this weird peg that goes in on the GX390s for them. You have to machine this boss down, not just flat. Originally, I thought I was going to be able to just put some washers under, and tried that. Ended up with 3 washers stacked on each side underneath, and the rockers were still rubbing against this. Didn't want to do any milling in here because it was gonna, you know, throw all kinds of shit underneath the valve seals and all that. So I thought I was gonna be able to get away with washers. Couldn't. Had to break the whole head down to a bare head. Put it on the mill. I took I think 220 thousandths off the top of this flat. Shink. Reassembled the valves, reassembled everything, put the things back in, and bam, they still hit. Took it out again, took another 20 thousandths off this boss, tightened it up, still hit. So I ended up having to 45 these both ways and take 220 thousandths off the top of this just to be able to clear the rockers so they free swivel. This is bare minimum, and the bare minimum requirement for any type of in-engine clearances is 60 thousandths between any parts moving. 60 thousandths space between parts moving. So that's bare minimum metal removal, and then you have to put this in before you put the rockers in this style head. If you don't put this in first and you put the rockers in, and then you won't be able to get this in after. The reason that they run this pin in this style head is because the needle bearings on the rockers are too close together. You see how this section here gets thinner? They're too close together, and what happens is that bolt that would come down normally wouldn't be able to fit through them. So they made this special stud that you screw in first, slide the rockers in between this area, tighten them down, and then there's a nut that comes on the top instead of a bolt. There's just a nut that holds the valve cover on. Really ingenious system to get this done, but just if they had to be this ingenious to get it done, you can only imagine how much of a bitch it is to get it set up. Now, anyone who's set up just standard gauge rockers knows that that's a bitch. So I mean, and you know, getting this in there, and this is excessive, and then, you know, I was feeling terrible on top of it, and then, you know, fitting up, you know, anyone that knows that doing the cut to length push rods is a nightmare. I'm talking 3 hours with all the best tools, with all the best knowledge. 3 hours. Just insanity. And it's not even done. So now we are doing the claying up. That was just to be able to get everything in there, check, make sure everything was working right, cut the friggin' rockers, check the lash, and get everything set just in order to break it back down. You know, just to basically cut the rocker, to cut the push rod, 3 hours. And install this pin and get the rockers functioning. So after that, so now that this is all ready to just get bolted back on, basically still has that nightmare of getting the rockers on through the gauge rockers. But we're going to clay it up now, find out what our piston head clearance is at with a 45 thousandths head gasket and the 1.2 to 1 ratio rockers, depending upon what our clay thickness is cut to on our slice test. If we are 80 thousandths or more, we can stay with a 45 thousandths thick head gasket, or it depends if we're 100 thousandths thickness, we can even go smaller on the head gasket. But if we're too tight, we'll have to go thicker on the head gasket. But either way, let's get this head bolted on and move forward. Next time you see me, we will be checking out this clay. About probably be an hour and a half later for you, for me, but instantaneously for you. All right, and now. All right, guys, so just clayed it up. As you can see, I am now breaking down the head. We need to cut some valve reliefs into the piston. That's that weird stud thing. You know, we've got all the pieces over here. Got the rockers covered up. So we will pull these seals out. These things are good because they don't like to come off, which is also makes them a bitch taking them off. Alright, so now that we got the head broken back down, what the way I do piston reliefs is, I will acetone these valves, take all the assembly lube and oil mixture that you put them together with, off, acetone them, get them all clean, spray adhesive, with 40 or 60 grit sandpaper, put them in the head, spin them with put the head on the cylinder, spin them with the drill, and tap it onto the piston. That will clearance an area where it is closest to the valve to the piston, and hence you will make a valve relief. So I'm about to start that journey, and I'll get back to you when I get some valve relief. So I'm about to wash the valves. I'm about to do the valve notches into the piston. 3M Super 77. If you're gonna do this yourself, that's the one you want. You take that spray it onto, I'm using 60 weight paper. This is stuff that uses wet or dry. It's waterproof. So what I do is take the Super 77, just a fine mist on the paper. I'll flip down the valves, fine mist under the valves. You know, they say to do the knuckle test where you make sure there's nothing coming up on your knuckles. So, I mean, this is the one that I've been using forever. I've used a few of them and I didn't like some of them. Some of them are just too sticky. What you really want to do is get like the edge of the paper, so that way when you're cutting off. So what I did was sprayed it like right here. That way, you know, you want to position like the valve right near the edge of the paper, so that way when you're cutting it off, you're just cutting a little bit, you know, like cutting into the center of the paper. So I did a little bit on the paper. I'm gonna let that sit for a couple minutes. I'm gonna hit these valves, let them sit until they're not like transferring onto my finger. Once they're both sticky, stick them down there. Cut them out. So these are like little valves with sandpaper just stuck to them. Install them in the head. But either way, I'll get the little discs on here and I'll come back to you. So just wait. All right, so we're back. As you can see, I have cut out or glued on and cut out the sandpaper things. Now, I am a perfectionist, and I did not cut these perfectly round for a actual reason. I didn't cut them perfectly round for a reason. I cut them with those little edges hanging off because you need side clearance on valves as well as just top to bottom. You need 80 thousandths piston to valve. That means if this is in a hole in the piston and there isn't 80 thousandths on the side, you are still in risk of hitting that valve. So you need 80 thousandths piston to valve clearance. That means everywhere around that valve. So a little bit of overhang, you want to leave that on there so that can kind of, you know, clearance itself around the... So what I'm going to do now is pop these into the cylinder head. Take this cylinder head, put it onto the engine, and take a drill and rotate these and tap them down into the piston and get some valve clearance. I'll be back. Alright guys, so this is the final result. This is the head, how it looks with the two valves with the sandpaper in it, and this is the piston. I just put some black marker on there so you could distinguish it. I mean, I didn't know if, you know, you can't really see it that well. So let's see how deep we ended up with here. Depends on where you measure it. There's like a bump that comes up here, so you got to catch it not on that bump. So we're about 42 to 50 thousandths on that side. About 60 thousandths on the exhaust side. Yeah, we're about... That one said 70. It's kind of hard to get a feel for it. See if we can get a nice accurate measurement here. So that's probably as close as I can get it. About 50 thousandths. So on the intake side, we had about 30 thousandths of clay gap. So 50 plus 30 would be 80. We're also going to be using 10 thousandths thicker head gasket. The head gasket we're using is like a 42 thousandths stock one. We're going to be for the 78 millimeter GX270 pistons. They only sell for, I like multi-layer steel head gaskets, and they only sell those 10 thousandths thick steel gaskets. So we're going to stack 5 of those. So we're going to have 50 thousandths gasket surface. So we'll have an extra 10 thousandths in gasket surface. We're going to have 90 thousandths piston to valve on the intake. So we should be all set with this piston to valve reliefs now. So we will go ahead, bolt on this head, and this engine is ready to go. So this is just, you know, easy way to do your piston valve reliefs. And, you know, I'm a big fan of the billet pistons with the valve reliefs cut in them. Sometimes, like a GX270, you're going to get a cast piston that you need to cut valve reliefs in. They just don't make the billet piston with valve reliefs in this GX270. They just don't make it. So if you have to cut valve reliefs, this is how I do it. Paul from Paul's Karts. Hopes this thing helped you guys. And until next time, have a nice day.